The Three-Body Problem, Xixing Liu. Quite an interesting read, really. The series will be on Netflix, and a series will be made. The book itself is very, very interesting in that it's being written by a Chinese author. So interesting in the sense that I'm not quite used to the kind of style and topics that are being discussed and the way they are being addressed. It's the Xixing Liu is actually an engineer, so has quite a lot to say about sciences, a lot to explore. And I'm not so familiar with science fiction in general. The last science fiction book I actually read, and I don't recall ever reading another science fiction book, was War of the Worlds, which is a classic. And yeah, that was quite a good read, but this one is quite different in its nature and the essence and what it conveys. So the many topics that were explored are quite had a very heavy feeling to them as well as being I mean, again, interesting and different. But it starts off with the Chinese Revolution, where the Communist Revolution, where quite a few horrible things did happen. And careful, I'll be going into spoilers. I'll be going all in, forgot to mention. So tread carefully if you want to discover the book by yourself. You've been warned. And yeah, it was kind of an interesting perspective to hear from someone who actually described his childhood as being extremely, in rural China, extremely poor, to the point where most of his friends didn't even have shoes. And yeah, and having him being a best-selling author and kind of like conveying the way science took over the minds of Chinese people. And actually it's interesting in the story that scientists are being targeted, or not necessarily targeted, that's how the trailer presents it, but there's kind of like a sort of a war going on with scientists. And so it's kind of very interesting to see that culture that kind of like got out of the whole misery from the communist era through science, and then now how the overall philosophy towards life is. That I found that quite fascinating and quite telling beyond the mere setting of the story or the themes that the story purports to explore. And yeah, it's very, and it was very gripping and immersive, and to read also from the country life in China, in poor rural areas. And interestingly enough, an author, Chinese author who moved to France, wrote an interesting book called Balzac and the Little Seamstress, Dai Ji he's called. And interestingly enough, in another of his books, I did come across a scene where it was very immersive as well to go through the description of rural China. Both cases, I kind of like, I'm very fascinated. I don't know what it is about those descriptions that make them so compelling. So I actually did find it very interesting to explore this whole Pandora's box of, okay, let's come in touch with aliens and let's see if this will be a good thing or not, but let's hope it will make the world a better place, because we're in so much pain down here on Earth. Which is kind of like reminded me a bit indirectly. I was thinking of Prometheus, the movie by Ridley Scott, and those things never go well. Where you summon a very strong force to help you out of some form of misery you're in, and this stronger force just devours you, pretty much. force on another planet. It just so happens that that's a common theme here as well. Anyhow, so an interesting thing as well was that the alien civilizations were quite human-like, anthropomorphic, not specifically in their shapes, as it's described as their shapes is not really I mean, they describe that we can't see the shape, but we have to imagine that it's very human-like. It's kind of like left open for the interpretation that we can project whatever we want, which is something that Netflix will have to play with in terms of like how to portray them. There's an interesting thing as well. There is I mean, it's very different from the aliens think a lot like humans. There's propaganda going on. There's like different sorts of political views. There's different. There is a very specific thing where they say, okay, we've been through the atomic age. Now we're past that, but that's kind of like it's kind of like very similar to us, and it's an interesting thing is that there is this sort of like way to connect through video games to what the alien civilization is all about, like 3D glasses type things, and yeah, and the creativity of the book is really quite something, and I really enjoyed this coming together of so many different views, different things, different thoughts on different mathematical problems or whatever it was, history, historical, the description of this small village, small Chinese village, and the influence of the West is very noticeable as well. I really enjoyed that, and I came across two interesting videos that kind of like did quite a lot for me to enjoy it even more. It was a TED Talk on Newton's three-body problem, which is quite a succinct 4-minute or so video going in depth on what the three-body problem actually is, very accessible, and the Antique Clockwork Marvels from China's Forbidden City video, amazing, showing clockworks that were exposed someplace, and actually one quote from that video was that emperors were interested in timekeeping, which is very interesting, and that emperors also, it was also mentioned that emperors were kind of like this connection between heaven and earth, which is very interesting, since I didn't know that, to have that as an explanation, given that one emperor in the story at some point has exactly those roles, so it's not that far-fetched. That video and the cultural influences and all that was quite something else, and the fact that actually the clockworks described, Clockwork Orange, were described as being involving British technology and Chinese technology coming together. And therefore, it's a bit like this book, really, that's been influenced by many, apparently, British authors of science fiction, and having a name that directly refers to a Newtonian problem. So yeah, there's again this coming together of civilizations, and it's really going to be interesting with the whole Netflix thing coming with the. Working with that Chinese best-selling author, having the Game of Thrones not cast, partly too, but like the directors from Game of Thrones, and probably the crew as well, and it's a very interesting concept to have that all come together the way it does. So yeah, it's quite, sometimes it's quite direct, let's say, the book and its content, but really worth it. I would I would really say it's something that I didn't expect. I didn't know what I was expecting. I'm not very familiar with science fiction in general, but the last books I enjoyed the way I did enjoy this book were books that had to do with fantasy, more fantasy, like Michael Ende, like Momo, The Never Ending Story, stuff like that. But those were like more books that I read when I was a child, or teenager. When I was a teenager, I read like what's it called, His Dark Material and stuff like that. The Bartholomeus trilogy and all of those, and those were more like books that, more like for the aspiring young man, still a child, but like, giving me enough to dream, and this one had like all the science and all to make it much more like dense, and with the whole Chinese element of culture and history. It was very reminiscent of that time, but much more like stuff in it, much more like density, and it was much more compact, So yeah, quite the book. Kind of like reading it is kind of like a weird dream, let's say. I don't dream those types of dreams, but that's how it felt, and yeah, kind of a very interesting. Also, I use the word interesting quite a bit because that's what it is. It did interest me, and was very compelling in its own right. But it very much teased out some interesting questions surrounding ethics and place of religion and propaganda and people going crazy and mass movement like the communist revolution. What's the place of humans in the midst of all of this vast universe and all the nihilism? How to deal with that? And a lot of destruction described as well that unfortunately took place for real, like destroying entire forests for no particular reason, just to keep people busy, and it was kind of a mad thing, mad time, and so extracting meaning out of it by writing about it, making it beautiful, making it into a story. That's quite a feat. The author actually mentioned that growing up reading about science really was like so much more interesting to him than any fable or myth or book, classical story type book that one might come across. No, for him, he said science and mathematics are much richer, and there's this trend right now with Dune 2 that just came out, and I don't know, I come across much more science fiction at the moment. So yeah, it's quite a departure from say Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, but which I did really enjoy watching when I was much younger. So yeah, I hope you'll enjoy the series if you ever were to watch it. I hope it won't go too woke, that would be a shame. But if it's good quality wise, I'm all in for it. Other than that, just if you were to read the book, have a good enjoy it. It might take a while to get into the whole thing, especially since it's kind of like very heavy in terms of feelings. One needs to go past that, and then one can really enjoy it. But aside from that, thanks for your attention, and I hope this was enjoyable for you as well. I hope this was interesting. Take care.